Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining Chris and I. We're very excited to have you today. We got a pretty intense topic to cover. Chris, are you ready to get moving? And I'll introduce the topic and get us going.
I'm ready to rock and roll, David, as always.
All right. So first and foremost, remember, we love conversation. We love communication. Please don't hesitate to share your ideas, your thoughts. Throw a question out there. We'll definitely answer your question midstream. We very much enjoy doing that. So we love that, actually, and it helps all of us learn. So we are talking about Agile market entry. Agile market entry. And so, Chris, in tight, concise words, what is it?
So Agile market entry is a sales framework designed specifically for launching disruptive products, and particularly, David, complex B2B products.
Wow, complex. Okay. Disruptive and complex B2B products.
Correct.
Any specific industry?
Most of my work is in the healthcare, life sciences, med tech, diagnostic industry, but over the last 5 or 10 years, I've branched out beyond that. This is as long as you have a complex B2B product, primarily driven by that sales rep customer relationship, that's where Agile market entry has the best fit.
Excellent. So, it's interesting. Whenever you try to birth something, and this is something that you have birthed, there has to be a reason why. So why have you spent the last 5 years building this thing out, building this AME framework?
Yeah, so first of all, it's become a passion of mine. But it all starts. So I've spent most of my career, David, in startups in the healthcare life sciences field. Probably about, in my late 20s, I worked with my first startup and I was hooked right out of the gate. It intrigued me. I think, the idea of doing something for the first time caught me. But I think the thing that really got me was this need to be very creative as well as deliver a result that literally caught my attention right out of the gate, and then the challenge of it. And then, so that's got me into the startup world and the, disruptive products. The first product I actually sold in that world was a handheld device for taking the electronic medical record to the hospital bed in hospitals. That was kind of the first foray. But what kind of sparked the whole idea of AME was a conversation I had with a client, probably one of my early consulting clients. Her name was Lana Williams, is CEO of a company where they were developing a diagnostic for major depressive disorder, and we were launching it into the market. And I remember we were probably 6 or 8 months into this, and Lana and I were having a cocktail at a meeting site, and we were just, shooting the bull. And she looked at me, she goes, Chris, you and I have been really successful, getting some early customers, but the last couple sales reps we brought on, they've really struggled. They're actually failing. What's different? And at that moment, David, I really didn't have an answer for her. I really didn't know, but it's actually, that's what put the light or put the question in my head. What is different? And so shortly after that, I started going out there and trying to find a framework that actually fit for doing the type of work we were doing, which was disruptive products, particularly in the case with Lana, with the diagnostic for depression. And the best I could find was a gentleman by the name of Craig Wortman out of the University of Chicago. But they were really relevant, but they were only pieces of the things that I was sorting out. And when I realized that there really wasn't a framework for what I was doing or trying to figure out, that's when that kind of set me on my path of, as you said, birthing Agile market entry. So
I wanted to make sure people kind of process this a little bit. So what you're really saying and what you have seen is that traditional sales processes, you got your spin selling, your consultative selling, you have all these, and you have predictive revenues model, you have inbound people feeding outbound people, you have BDRs feeding account managers. These are all good.
Yes. But there's nothing wrong with those.
but they fail when trying to sell a disruptive product.
Correct. And all of those ones you're talking about, there's a fundamental piece to it. They're designed for selling products at scale. Once you've kind of gone through this early stage that you have with launching disruptive products and you get to scale, that's what every sales rep's been trained to do, is to operate at that stage. This early stage, particularly for disruptive products, is different.
You're trying to find how it is you're going to sell.
Yeah, it's more of a discovery process. And this is one of the fundamental principles of Agile Market Entry. Agile Market Entry is a discovery process. When you're operating at scale, you're executing the sales process, and it's a process that's already proven to be effective.
Yes.
At the launch of a disruptive product, you don't have that sales process. You actually, instead of executing it, you actually have to discover it.
And I'm actually living that right now with one of my clients.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. So we're not going to get into that right this second. But, the thing about it's kind of cool is, you got this word agile, has a lot of connotations in it. When we first started talking, I was thinking more on the product management side of it.
Yeah.
We had our debates there. But so tell me how the work that's being done in design thinking and lean startup match up or don't match up. Where can it be used? Where can it be used as it relates to applying this framework for selling disruptive products?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. So you introduced me to Agile probably 3 or 4 years ago, and I didn't even know of such a thing up until then. And there's a lot of parallels between that, design thinking, customer discovery from Steve Blank, Clay Christensen's Jobs to Be Done, the lean startup from Eric Ries you talked about. And these are all progress that we've made over the last 10 or 15 years around disruptive technology. And
isn't it more product centric though? Is it more about defining the product, not selling it?
Yes. Well, some of them are. So when you start about design thinking and Agile, they're more product side. Agile's starting to move beyond that. When you get into Eric Ries and the lean startup, that becomes more around the business model, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Now, Clay Christensen with Jobs to Be Done, and then Steve Blank on customer. That's a really early start, but that's pre-sale. All the work that they're doing is pre-selling.
Yeah.
And all those things have been designed because they bring this discovery mindset to the product development and the early trying to find product market fit. They bring this discovery mindset to that. That's what those tools are designed to do. What they don't address is the unique aspects of selling a disruptive product for the first time. And that's exactly where Agile Market
Something called the 3 Ps. What are the 3 Ps?
That's just my term. I call it the 3 Ps of Agile Market Entry. It's the principles, so the underlying operating principles, the thinking behind it, this discovery mindset versus this execution mindset is one of the principles of Agile Market. Then the practices or tactics. How do you actually go about executing appropriately at this stage? The tactics, and then the last one is the people aspects. Okay. We could spend a whole session on the people aspects.
Yeah, we're getting them introed. And folks, by the way, questions, comments, thoughts. We'd love to get them. We'd love to have them. Don't hesitate. When your question pops up, I can put it on the screen so you can actually see we're engaging your question. So don't hesitate to do that. We'd love to hear from you. So before we hit, some of the other questions, you mentioned to me just recently that you saw a book out there called Agile Sales.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts there? Not that it's a bad book or anything like that, but what is that book comparison to, again, the mindset of Agile Market Entry?
Yeah. So Agile. So I just ran across it. It's the first time I've ever seen a book that's really brings the Agile principles to sales. But that's basically what from my understanding of what that book does. It, Scrum, customer-centric thinking. I'm not an expert in Agile, but it basically brings Agile concepts to scale level sales. It's
Okay, so
still,
yeah, so something that's existing, that's operational, maybe you're having some mistakes, maybe you're not selling as well as you once did. Let's bring agile selling in to
yep.
try to revive our selling process for this existing product.
Yeah, so it's at scale or at growth stage, and there's a lot of really good things in Agile that apply. This idea of the VUCA, this changing world and this volatile world. Agile's very good for adjusting that, and you bring those principles to a sales team that probably are very effective.
But again, it's still based on, they might be changing the selling style, but it's not based on trying to sell a disruptive product.
It's not designed to address the introduction stage or this pre-scale stage of a disruptive product.
So here's the
That's
problem.
unique.
The problem we both see is that a company needs to change to grow.
Correct.
All right. So a company has to change what they're selling in order to grow. So they build new products,
Yep.
but then they try to use the same processes, both marketing processes and then what we're talking about is selling processes to try to bring that product to market.
Correct.
And that's where a lot of the companies are failing without realizing it. Firing VPs of sales when they shouldn't be firing VPs of sales, turning over sales organizations when they shouldn't be turning over sales organizations because there's a missing link.
Yeah, there's a missing link, and just like you described, they pointed the people or the tactical aspects of it, and this is not a tactical or practice level problem. It's a systemic level problem or more principles of it's a more foundational problem. It's actually using tools designed for the growth stage of the product lifestyle to try to apply to the introduction stage of the product lifestyle, particularly for disruptive products. And so it's more of a processes and a principle or a foundational level discussion, challenge problem.
So now as we pivot to your next question, it's really around, well, Dave, you have new products and you have disruptive products.
Yep.
So this is really honing in on disruptive products. And, 20 years ago, we wouldn't even have this conversation because we're very few disruptive products.
Yep.
But now, because of VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, the pace of rapid change, new technology deployments, the AI world coming to bear right now, seeing it firsthand, we have a lot more disruptive products. So this is truly, let's get into that definite a disruptive product. Get into your points of why this is based on disruptive products, not just any new product.
So when we talk disruption, disruptive, I like to think of disruptive versus incremental line extensions, that type of, that's where I kind of break it down. I mean, if you go into McKinsey, they have their 3 horizons. You could look at it that direction as well. But fundamentally, disruptive products are changing the way we do something or bringing new technology to new markets, that type of arena. That's disruptive. And by definition, disruption means we're doing something for the very first time.
Okay.
And not just the company and the sales reps, but the customers are, we're building something for the very first time. We're selling something for the very first time. And then probably even just as critical, if not more critical, our customers are doing something different for the very first time.
Yes. And again, I'm in the middle of that right now with a client. Right now.
Yeah.
We are selling something for the first time that nobody's really sold before.
And it's that statistically wise, David, this is probably one of the hardest, if not the hardest thing to do in business. Yep. And it's because of all this uncertainty, all these unknowns.
Yes.
Now, why disruptive? Why do I point out disruptive versus any other type of product like incremental? There's a couple things that are kind of hidden in the background when we're selling. One is, and we talked about this earlier, sales reps, they've been trained and taught, and what they're skilled at doing is executing a proven sales process.
Yep.
Now, when we're launching a disruptive product, we're actually have to discover the sales process. By definition, we don't have that sales process. And this is kind of one of the thinking problems I run into all the time with clients, and especially experienced leaders of sales. They build a go-to-market strategy or go-to-market plan, and then they go about executing the plan. what gets forgotten after they write the plan is that plan was based on huge assumptions.
That's right.
Some assumptions that are valid, some that are invalid, and even more critical, David, assumptions that aren't even aware of until you're actually in the market selling. So
yeah, I have this disruptive product. I have an ideal customer profile for my previous product. They're very similar in what the outcome objectives are for the delivery. So I make my messaging around that specific ICP, and I try to scale it based on that ICP messaging from the existing product to sell a new product, and I wonder why it's not working.
Correct. And because you have built your plan around that ICP, you keep doubling down and keep going after that.
Yeah,
ICP.
you add more. Oh, let me add some more salespeople. Oh, maybe I could do a little bit more marketing. I know my ICP. This is the ICP. This is the messaging that's worked for this similar type of product that we were selling. This should work, and it doesn't.
And that happens with the ICP, that happens with messaging, that happens with the lead gen process, that happens with the sales process, the sales cycle, the adoption process post-sale. That all it compounds upon itself, but that it can happen at many different places. Even if you get your ICP right, but you get your messaging around it, or you're not calling on the right doctors with the right messaging, even though you got the right doctors or the right customers. But it all gets back to shifting back to executing a plan versus discovering the
Hey, customer, I want to talk to you a little bit. Hey, you've bought this stuff before. What about this? How would you see yourself buying this? Where would that fit in? Do you think there's somebody else within your organization to buy it? Or are some of the things that you start teaching in AEM and how you would engage a customer?
Yeah. So you're thinking all those things at the same time you're selling, right? So this is why it gets complex and challenging. So you have to be doing discovery while you're
We're actually doing this right now with a client in that same consulting gig where we discovered, we pitched, and now they're engaging and it's teaching us about how to sell that ICP based on how they're engaging us and how they're wanting to buy. It's been a really cool discovery process to see this, but it would not have fit into the natural.
Correct. And you have an advantage, David, because you have these you operate from some of these principles we're talking about. So you find this cool and engaging and enlightening. You hand that to a sales force,
and they're pissed off, they're frustrated, they're agitated. How can I make, because I'm not commissioned the same way they are.
Exactly.
They're scale and repeat. I want to make money on scale and repeat.
And it's not so much the commissioning, the structural is important, but it's more the way they think and operate and the way they've been trained to think and operate. They're not trained to discover a process. They're trained to execute. So they don't have the skill set, the knowledge, or even the mindset to go.
So you have a story about this. You have a real client story about this.
Oh yeah, I have lots of clients.
Well, there's one here particularly. Let's tell us the story.
So a couple of years ago, I was brought in by the VP of sales for a startup company. It was a med tech company. They were developing a dry eye product. Truly disruptive technology. If you like Restasis or drops, stuff like that out there, most of it's designed to treat the tears of the eye. What their product was designed to treat was the oils of the eye. Very different. And it was truly disruptive. It was disruptive for the patients, very disruptive for patients from an outcome standpoint, disruptive for the clinician, the physician, the ophthalmologist, and it was truly disruptive for the product, for the practice as well. So this company, as I said, was brought in by the VP of marketing to help them sort out some struggles they were having in the marketplace. And what they had done is they had hired a high-powered VP of sales, a no prisoners type of guy.
Yeah, I love this part of the story. I mean, keep going. When I read this story, I'm like, this is so cool. Go into it. High-powered, skilled, and you said these salespeople were really good.
This was one of the best sales forces I've ever worked with, David.
Yeah.
These were really skilled. They were paid well. They were hired well. A lot of them came from existing networks. People had known each other. Really highly skilled sales force. And they probably ramped up. They had over, when I got involved, they had over 20 reps that were out selling this product. And I come to learn that they did the typical thing. They did the huge product launch. They went out to all the major shows, the American Academy of Ophthalmology, the American Society of Cataract and Refractive Surgeons. They had all the right KOLs they were working with, big marketing campaign that accompanied the product launch and the PR campaign.
Right. So what happened?
So, so as typically happens, and this is one of the insidious things, they got a couple early adopters. And got some good some early traction. And they got them even more excited. But what happened within 6 months of launch, their sales reps started missing their quotas. The company started missing plan. They started struggling. And they did what you typically see do. They doubled down on all the things they had done before. New product promotions. They ramped up some marketing campaigns. More motivating, pressuring the sales reps.
Yep.
Do more. Exactly. Turn the cranks, crank it up. But basically what they were doing all the mistakes we were talking about. They were pressuring the sales team to execute. When I came in, what they were missing was they didn't have a sales process that worked across their sales force.
Now we have a good call for Charles. We have a good Met call. I think we're on the radio. Yep. We have a good question from Charles, and I know Charles. So, hey, Charles, good to have you. But you call this the innovation death spiral.
Yes, I call this the innovation death spiral.
I love it. So here's Charles's question: do you gain a foothold by identifying early adopters who are more likely to take a risk on a new product and they're open to trying new things? And do you identify these customers and target them with marketing efforts? Where's your thoughts there?
So in relation to this story, you got to go after those early adopters. This company identified some early adopters. It can happen by happenstance, like it did in this case. That case, it can be dangerous. If you identify early adopters, if you point to go after early adopters, you can be very effective. That's part of what you want to do in the early launch of
But doesn't an early adopter on the marketing side have a little bit different mindset than as you're trying to do discovery to find a more meaty section of the universe size?
Well, Dave, when you're doing disruptive products, you can't go after the meaty section.
So you are staying in that.
You got it. Early on, you have to stay with the early adopters. This is going to be beyond what we covered today, but there's an adoption stage of a disruptive product. Yep. I ran into it with this client. If you get the early majority or beyond as your early customers, the odds of them going through the adoption of a disruptive product are low. They're not the risk takers to do that. So that actually happened a lot with this client I'm talking about. Their sales reps were so effective that they got a lot of the early majority in their sales.
So what you're saying is AEM, you have to target, whether on the marketing side or on the sales side, people that you believe are early adopters of things like this.
You have to target them because other people won't go through the learning that you have to go through to adopt the disruptive technology. It's those visionary early adopters. What happens in the early stage of purchasing a product? They buy a product for two reasons. One is the pain of the present and the value of the future. That's what.
Here's the thing. Here's the thing about Charles's question. I'm a big land and expand guy, and so I agree with Charles in the fact that marketing can land you some of these innovators, but the sales process for AEM has to teach you how to scale it following a sales process, so that you can scale. Marketing can find entry, but marketing can't scale. Does that make sense?
Correct. Yes, that makes sense. Because the marketing just gets you to find those people early on. To get the scale, you have to crossing the chasm. Crossing the chasm's a real thing. And
building the process and then scaling the sales process.
Building a process to get there. So part of it's building the process to get from the early adopters to scale. But then the other part of it, David, is building the credibility. And this is what Jeffrey Moore talks about in Crossing Chasms, is building the credibility. You have to have that. if we do this well with the early market entry, we can make the chasm a lot less deeper and a lot narrower to get across, because we start setting to cross that chasm from the very, very beginning.
So John has this question, and we know John well. Thank you, John, for this question. And I want to give you my first thoughts, because I'm leading, so I can do that because I'm paying your buttocks. How big of a business or organization should adopt these ideas? What is too small, and what can a small business learn? So, John, as I was exploring this and thinking about it, what really came to my mind is that SME-driven small businesses do this naturally. They're in natural discovery process. They are learning and ebbing and flowing, and they have the ability to do that. Then they land on something, if it's a product market fit, and then they scale it up. Example is like A Cloud Guru from the training perspective, and Pluralsight from the training perspective. These are companies that you would never realize are huge now, but they were started by individual subject matter experts who discovered, adjusted, pivoted, and then scaled, and then got a lot of money to scale. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. And addressing John's question, there's no company too small for doing this, but I think the natural tendency to do this well, you're more likely to see that in a small company, because they're already designed to be lean. They're already, as you mentioned, they're already designed to be in this discovery mode. That's kind of in their DNA a little bit more.
Yeah, it's a natural discovery, and there's not as much risk. See, the big thing with agile market entry of these bigger companies, Chris, is risk, right? All right, how much money do you want to spend on this versus this other one? And the company fights, well, we should keep spending on the existing and just do the existing better and not even spend money over here.
Yeah, so yes. Risk. So, but I almost think of that as the opposite, David, is risk. I think it's risky not to do these.
We both think that, but that's not what.
Absolutely. The mind thinking, so there's I've mostly worked in startups, but my understanding of big companies, first of all, there's the cultural risk of doing it, right?
Yeah.
And then there's the actual market risk of doing it and failing.
Yes.
But the problem is
you should fail, and you should be able to fail, pivot, adjust, and try again.
Well, you and I know that's the way this should work, but it doesn't always work that way.
No, you're right. Because I loved your story. We talked about this garage full of medical devices that were probably fantastic, that were rolled out improperly, that you could go buy, and if you sold them properly, you can make a ton of money.
Oh, I think there's huge opportunities for that out
the Fred Sanford of medical devices, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think there's huge opportunities in these existing companies to do that, exactly that. Pull things off the shelf, figure out the ones that were truly disruptive, but we didn't enter the market efficiently, and dropped it because we thought it was a market issue or another issue, when really it was our internal processes that prevented the success of it.
All right,
I think there's huge opportunities. There's companies I know that are doing that today.
All right, so we're going to do this question with Pete. We got a question from Scott, and then we'll do the wrap up. So Pete's question here is, he used my meaty term. I like that. How do you make the transition from targeting the early adopters to the meaty section of the market you want to play in? So how do you make that transition, and when?
So that's really easy. So there's one thing that a sales force needs to effectively scale a product. It's real simple. It's a repeatable process that they can do over and over again. Once you have a repeatable process in a small team that you're validating that works, and then you spread it out, and that's when you spread it out and you scale.
Yeah, they start smelling the money, right? Oh, we can make money.
And that's one of the problems with launching disruptive products is a existing sales force takes a tool out that you don't give them that repeatable process. And the first thing they're going to do is they're going to try to sell it. When they fail, 90% of the sales force is going to put that to the back of the bag and not sell it. So you have to deliver. You have to deliver so if I were a VP of sales in a big company and R&D was giving me, or product development was giving me a product that was truly disruptive, I would tell them not to give it to me without the repeatable sales process.
Yeah, I did this by proof. I would prove like salespeople were selling one thing and I wanted to launch a disruptive product. I would prove it could be sold. That's what I would call it before understanding this process, and then show them, and then they all wanted to sell it.
Well, it's not only show them, you give them all the tools. You tell them You tell them who the target customer is. You tell them what the messaging is. You tell them exactly what the sales process is. You have the support team that's coming in behind them to manage the adoption. That's already been worked out. Only then, now you hand that to a sales rep, and he gets, in the first 5 or 6 calls, he has a win or two, and the win is on the product that has an 80, a 70% margin versus a 30% margin that has higher commissions on. Now you've got a winner with your sales force. If you take that same product and push it out to them without that, it gets to the back of goes right to the back of their bag, and they'll never sell it again.
All right, so Scott's question: to what degree do steps of the sales process, building awareness, magnifying discomfort and status quo, etc., change versus the deliverables necessary to move through those steps?
What degree do steps necessary of building awareness versus delivering? So
I think.
David, so when I'm launching a product, I don't worry too much about building awareness and magnifying discomfort with the status quo. I'm not trying
for a disruptive product. So when you go in and do this disruptive product process, what are you trying to what are the steps you're taking?
The first thing I'm looking for in my target customer profile is that pain that they have existing today that's going to pull my product towards them already. Okay. If I'm launching a disruptive product and I have to educate the market, some of this comes from my startup background. If I have to educate the market or advance their perception of pain, I don't have the luxury of doing that. There's too much change that has to go on both from the customer standpoint to try to do that. It's just too long. So I'm tapping into pain that's already going to yank my product and say, come to me, I'm going to do it. So I'm skipping over that. And that is by definition, that is your early adopter, your innovator. If you go back and read Jeffrey Moore's book on that, those folks are already looking for a solution to this problem. They may even be designing it themselves.
Yeah, they probably are, but they're having a tough time doing it because of priorities, and they're getting frustrated because it's slowing down. So that's where you can pop yourself in.
Exactly. So you're looking for those people that are already trying to do that, because that gives you a signal that this is something that, from a disruptive standpoint, there's already existing.
And it's funny, Chris, you should say it, because that's this pilot that we're doing for this client. The customer was trying to figure things out for themselves, but weren't making any headway.
Yeah, well, could be a couple different things. One is it could be they haven't figured out the right pain to get people to act, because remember, your competition for disruption is status quo. Get people to change behavior. That could be that problem. The other problem is they could have the late majority and the laggards in their pipeline, which means those people aren't going to buy your product early on if it's disruptive. They're not. They're just going to become those tire kickers that are going to fill up your pipeline. You're actually, and this is going to might be a little interesting, your sales process or your prospecting process for a disruptive product is a selection process, not a sales process. You want to deselect everybody that's an early majority or not, and select in only those early adopters and those visionaries, because those are honestly the only people that are going to buy efficiently and adopt your product and become the generation engine to get to the early majority and beyond.
Yeah. I'll wrap it up. We've gone over 3 minutes, so wrap up, Mr. Chris. It's all yours. The floor is yours.
So, well, first of all, Dave, this has been wonderful. This has been fun. The one thing, what I've learned over my career, and I like to think Agile market entry is going to make a huge impact, and I know it does. But this going from the launch to the scale of a disruptive product is probably one of the hardest things to do in business. I know I have lots of scars from it, like probably everybody here has. And the truth is, it's inherently risky. Launching disruptive, doing something new for the first time is inherently risky. I contend that we can do better by eliminating some of the risks that we're adding in by using some wrong methodologies, wrong principles, wrong processes.
And even the mindset change too, Chris. Really, what you're talking about is same with anything agile. AEM has a mindset, and from that mindset comes practices and principles. And so you're trying to adjust a mindset, which you did at the beginning. And then, if you want to engage you have that playbook that you can go in and start really getting into the practices and the principles associated with it. And certainly you can reach out to Chris on LinkedIn to get that playbook. But with that said, here's the skinny. You got additional questions, pop them in, because we'll look at this recording afterwards and answer questions. We really appreciate you being a part of this, and thank you so much. Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.